I had written her 41 letters in a single year, and I had sent none of them, and I had burned none of them either. They lived in the lowest drawer of my writing desk at Wexmore House, tied with a length of plain twine because ribbon would have felt like a confession, and every one of them began the same way and ended the same way. Miss Carroll, they began, because that was all I permitted myself. I remain, as ever, your servant, they ended, which was a lie, for a duke is no one's servant, least of all a governess's, and it was also the truest thing I had ever set to paper, for I was hers entirely and had been almost from the first morning I saw her cross the frost-white lawn at Elmsworth with my niece's small hand in her own. I am telling this badly and out of order, the way a man tells a thing he has held in for too long. Let me begin where it truly began, which is with the silence. For a full year after my brother Henry died, Wexmore House and Elmsworth alike had been silent houses. Not quiet, quiet is a gentle word, and there was nothing gentle in it. Silent, rather, the way a room is silent after a clock has stopped, when you keep waiting to hear the tick and it does not come, and the not coming is louder than any sound. Henry had been the warm one. Henry had filled every hall he entered with noise and argument and laughter. He had been the younger brother, the reckless one, the one who married for love against every prudent counsel and was gloriously happy for 6 years. And then his wife died in her 3rd winter of marriage. And then, 18 months after that, while I was abroad on business that I have never once been able to persuade myself could not have waited, Henry took a fever and was gone in 9 days. I did not reach England in time. I want that understood plainly, because it is the whole of me in those years. I was in Lisbon, arguing over the price of port and the terms of a shipping concern, and my brother was dying in a Berkshire bedroom, and by the time a letter reached me and I reached home, there was nothing left to do but stand at a graveside in the rain beside a solicitor and a 5-year-old girl who did not entirely understand where her father had gone, and to feel the whole weight of a truth settle onto my shoulders and stay there, that I had been away, that I was always away, that I had made a life of being the cold, useful, absent Thornhurst while Henry made a life of being the loved one, and that God, in his economy, had taken the wrong brother, and there was no correcting it now. The girl was my ward. Lady Sophia, Sophie, Henry had called her, and so I made myself call her, though the diminutive sat strangely in my mouth, like a word in a language I had learned late. She was Henry's whole heart in a small grave frock, and I was her guardian, and I had not the faintest idea in the world what to do with her. So I did what I knew. I engaged the proper people. A nurse, a physician on retainer, dancing masters and drawing masters in their season, and a succession of governesses, each more correct than the last, each of whom lasted a handful of months and then gave notice, because Sophie would not learn, would not speak above a whisper, would not eat, and would sit for hours at the window of the schoolroom at Elmsworth watching the drive as though her father might yet come up it in his mud-spattered coat. 3 governesses in 14 months. The 3rd left me a note that said the child was unreachable, and that she wished his grace every fortune in finding a lady with more patience than Providence had granted her. I remember reading it in my study and feeling nothing at all, which frightened me more than grief would have, because I had begun to suspect that the coldness people accused me of had at last become the truth of me, all the way through, and that Henry's warmth had died twice, once in him, and once in the house he'd left behind. It was my grandmother who found Miss Carroll. I should tell you about my grandmother, because she is half of this story whether she wishes the credit or not, and she wishes it very much. Augusta, the Dowager Duchess of Wexmore, was then in her 73rd year and had buried a husband, 2 sons, and more of her contemporaries than she cared to count, and had emerged from all of it not softened but sharpened, the way certain stones are. She was small and upright and dressed always in the deep violet of a woman who has decided that full mourning is a young person's indulgence. She missed nothing. She had a way of looking at a person over the rim of her teacup that made grown men confess to things they had not done, and she loved me, I think, more than she loved anyone left living, which meant she was the only person on earth entirely unafraid of me. "You are engaging governesses the way you engage clerks," she told me one gray afternoon in the drawing room at Wexmore House. "By their references. That child does not need a reference. She needs a person." "I have engaged 4 persons," I said. "You have engaged 4 references," said my grandmother, who happened to have persons attached. And she set down her cup and told me she had a candidate of her own, the daughter of a gentleman she had known slightly in better days, a Mr. Carew of Hampshire, a man of small estate and large library who had died 2 years since and left his affairs in a worse state than his neighbors had supposed, so that his daughter, gently bred and finely educated and now entirely without fortune, had gone out to earn her bread as a governess. "She is clever," Augusta said. "She is not fashionable, which will disappoint no one in this household, since neither are you. And she wrote me a letter of application, Adrian, that I have read 3 times, because it is the only one of the lot that sounds as though a living woman wrote it and not a manual of deportment." "Send for her then," I said, because it was easier than arguing, and because I had learned that my grandmother's whims cost less to indulge than to resist. I did not attend the interview. I make that admission plainly, because it belongs to the man I was. I did not think a governess any concern of mine. I signed what needed signing and left the choosing to Augusta, and returned to my ledgers, and I did not lay eyes on Miss Rosalind Carew until a fortnight later, at Elmsworth, on a morning so cold the windows had furned over with frost, when I came down earlier than my habit and looked out of the library window, and saw a young woman I did not know walking my niece across the white lawn. They were not doing anything of consequence. That is what I remember. The old governesses had marched Sophie from schoolroom to dining room and back along the correct routes at the correct hours. This one had taken her out into the cold and was walking her slowly across the frozen grass, and stopping and pointing at something, the tracks of a bird I saw later, a fine arrow print stitched across the frost, and Sophie was crouching down to look, and Sophie was talking. I could not hear the words through the glass. But I could see my brother's daughter, who had not willingly spoken above a whisper in a year, chattering up at a stranger with her small hands moving, and I could see the stranger listening as though nothing in the world were more worth her attention than a child's account of a bird's feet in the frost. I stood at that window a long time, longer than I would ever have admitted. And when at last the 2 of them came in, pink-cheeked and stamping the cold from their shoes in the hall, and my grandmother's new governess looked up and saw me standing there and dropped a curtsy and said, "Your Grace, I did not know you had come down. Lady Sophie has been showing me the whole of the East Garden. We are the best of friends already." When she said that, in a low, warm, unhurried voice, and looked at me with clear gray eyes entirely without fear or flattery, I felt something turn over in my chest that I had believed frozen solid, and I did not have a name for it, and I did not want one, and I bowed to her more stiffly than I have ever bowed to anyone, and I said, "I am glad to hear it, Miss Carew," and I fled to my study like a boy. That was the beginning. I was 37 years old, and I fled a governess in my own hall, and I have never been sorrier for anything, and I have never regretted it for an instant, both of which are true. She stayed. That is the first miracle, and I claim no part in it. The house that had swallowed 3 governesses in 14 months did not swallow Rosalind Carew because she declined to be swallowed. She simply set about, without fuss or announcement, the work of thawing us. Within a month Sophie was eating at table. Within 2 she was laughing, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, that I first heard from the schoolroom above my study and mistook, for one heart-stopping moment, for Henry's. Miss Carew taught her letters by making them into a game of hunting for them in the carvings of the old staircase. She taught her sums with a set of Henry's boyhood marbles she had found God knew where. She read to her in the evenings, and I formed the habit, I am not proud of the stealth of it, of standing in the passage outside the schoolroom door in the half-hour before Sophie's bedtime, in the dark, listening to a governess read a child to sleep. I told myself I was ensuring the quality of the instruction. I was doing nothing of the kind. I was standing in a cold corridor being warmed by a voice, the way a poor man stands outside a baker's on a winter morning for the heat of the ovens through the wall, taking what was not offered to him because he had nowhere else to be warm. We spoke, of course. A guardian and a governess must speak. There are decisions to be made about a child, and I made a point, I confess it now, of finding a great many decisions that required Miss Carrow's opinion. Should Sophie begin the pianoforte or wait a year? Would the sea air do her good in the summer? Was she too much alone, and ought there to be other children? I invented occasions to consult her the way a miser invents reasons to visit his gold, and Miss Carrow answered every question sensibly and warmly, and without once seeming to notice that a duke was contriving to spend 3/4 of an hour discussing whether a 6-year-old ought to learn French. And in those hours I learned her. I learned that she had grown up in a house full of books and no money, and had loved it, and did not pity herself for the loss of it, which was the rarest thing about her. I learned she had nursed her father through his last illness alone, the servants having been let go, and that she spoke of those months without self-pity and without martyrdom, as a thing that had simply been hers to do. I learned she had a dry, quiet wit that ambushed you when you least expected it, and a way of going very still and gray-eyed when she was moved that told you more than any exclamation could. I learned that she was not, by any fashionable measure, a beauty. Her features were too grave, her coloring too plain, her figure too slight, and I learned that I could not look away from her, and that the two facts had nothing whatever to do with one another. And I learned, God help me, that I loved her on an ordinary Tuesday in the 2nd month of her employment, when Sophie fell from the low wall of the kitchen garden and cut her hand, and I came running at the noise to find Miss Carrow already there, kneeling in the mud in her one good gray gown, with my niece's bleeding hand pressed between both of hers, saying, there now, it is only a little blood, and a little blood means you are brave, and brave girls are the best kind. Shall I tell you a secret? Your father was the bravest boy in 3 counties. Everyone says so, and I dare say you have it from him. And Sophie stopped crying to hear that her father had been brave, and looked up with her whole wet face open, and Miss Carrow looked up too, and saw me standing there, and for one unguarded instant before she remembered herself, her face was full of a tenderness so complete, for the child, for the dead father she had never met, for the whole grieving house she had walked into and set about mending with her bare hands, that I had to turn and go, because a man does not weep in front of his household. And I was very near to it. I went to my study, and I took out a sheet of paper and I wrote, Miss Carrow, I do not know how to thank you for what you did in the garden this morning, and if I attempted it aloud I should make a fool of myself, so I write it instead and shall not send it, for a man in my position cannot write such things to a woman in yours. But you have given my brother's daughter back to me, and in doing so you have given me back a great deal that I had thought lost past recovering, and I find I love you, which is impossible and which I shall therefore never say. I remain, as ever, your servant. I read it over, I did not send it. I could not have said then, whether the impossibility I meant was the difference in our stations, or the coldness in my own soul, or the plain fact that I did not deserve, after Henry, to be happy. But I meant all 3, and each alone would have been enough. I folded the letter and put it in the lowest drawer of my desk, and I told myself it was a weakness I would be rid of by morning. By morning I wrote another. That is how the year passed. Whenever the feeling came upon me too strongly to master, when she laughed, when she was moved, when she said something clever at dinner, when I saw the small kindnesses she did that she believed unobserved, the way she saved the warm seat by the fire for the arthritic old butler, the way she never let a servant's name go unlearned, whenever it rose in me past bearing, I did not speak. I wrote, Miss Carrow. I told the paper things I would rather have died than say aloud. I told it that I had begun to be able to bear the mornings again. I told it that Sophie had my brother's laugh, and that hearing it no longer broke me but healed me, and that this was her doing. I told it once, in a letter I nearly did burn, that I had come to believe a man might be forgiven even the sin of having been absent when he was needed, if he could learn to be present now, and that she had taught me this without knowing she taught it, simply by being herself, so unfailingly present, so exactly where she was, in a way I never had been in my life. 41 letters over a year. And I remain, as ever, your servant at the foot of everyone and everyone in the drawer, and the drawer locked, and the key on my watch chain, and no one in the world any the wiser. Except that someone was. Of course someone was. There was always someone, and the someone was always my grandmother. We removed to London for the season in the spring. Sophie was too young to be out naturally, but Augusta insisted the child benefit from the town's amusements and the town's physicians, and I suspect now she insisted chiefly because she had her own reasons for wanting the household under one roof at Wexmore House where she might observe it. Miss Carroll came with us, of course. And it was in London, at the very outset of the season, that the past walked back into her life through my own front door, in the person of Mr. Gideon Ashby. I did not know at first who he was. I knew only that on a certain afternoon I came in from my club to find a gentleman in my drawing-room whom I had not invited, a fair, easy, good-looking man of about my own age, well-dressed in the newest cut, with the sort of open, agreeable face that has never in its life been refused anything it truly wanted, and that he was sitting with my grandmother and Miss Carroll, and that Miss Carroll's color was high and her hands were folded very tightly in her lap. "Adrian," said my grandmother, in a voice like a cat crossing a room full of milk, "you must allow me to present Mr. Ashby, a friend of Miss Carroll's family from Hampshire. He called to renew the acquaintance. Was that not thoughtful of him?" "Your Grace," said Mr. Ashby, rising and bowing with perfect ease, "I hope I do not intrude. I could not learn that Miss Carroll was in town and not do myself the honor. We are very old friends." Very old friends. I have never in my life heard 3 plainer words carry a heavier freight. I looked at Miss Carroll, and Miss Carroll looked at the carpet, and I understood, in the way one understands a thing all at once and completely, that this smiling stranger in my drawing-room had once been more to her than a friend, and that whatever had passed between them had ended, and that his sudden appearance had reopened it, and that I had no right in the world to mind, and that I minded so violently I could scarcely keep my countenance. I learned the history in pieces over the following weeks, some of it from Augusta, who learned everything, some of it, this is the part that undid me, from Miss Carroll herself, for she did not hide it. That was so entirely like her that it half broke my heart. On an evening not long after, when I had contrived one of my consultations about Sophie, and we sat late in the small back parlor with the child long abed, she told me, quietly and without my asking, because she said she thought I ought to know that Mr. Ashby was likely to call often, and she would not have me suppose there was any concealment in it. Gideon Ashby, she said, had been the son of her father's nearest neighbor. They had grown up in and out of one another's houses. And when she was 19, and her father still living and the estate still solvent, there had been an understanding between them, not a formal engagement, but a thing everyone expected, a thing she herself had expected, being 19 and having known no other young man, and finding this one kind and merry and near at hand. And then her father had died, and the true state of his affairs had come to light, and there had been no fortune, and no dowry, and no estate, and Mr. Ashby, she said, had been very sorry and very kind, and had gone away to a cousin in the north to look about him, and had somehow never come back, and the understanding had simply dissolved, the way a thing dissolves that was made of expectation and habit rather than iron. I was hurt, she said plainly, looking into the fire. I will not pretend I was not, but I was young, and I have since had 2 years of earning my own bread and keeping my own counsel, and it has taught me a great deal about the difference between a man who is kind when kindness costs him nothing, and a man who is kind when it costs him something. I do not think Gideon is a bad man, Your Grace. I think he is a man who has never once had to be brave and does not know that of himself and would be very surprised to hear it. She looked up at me then with those clear gray eyes. He has come into money I collect, a cousin's estate. He is now, I suppose, in a position to marry where he once could not. And I find I am to be permitted to matter to him again, now that it is convenient. A small, wry, entirely unbitter smile. You see how it is. I saw exactly how it was. I saw that this smiling, easy man had loved her when it was pleasant and abandoned her when it was hard and come back when it was profitable. And I saw that she saw it too, and I felt a savage, unworthy gladness. And then I looked at her plain gray gown and her ringless hands and the whole weight of her circumstances. A gently bred woman with no fortune and no family and no prospect, but a lifetime of other people's schoolrooms. And my gladness curdled into something worse. For what had I to offer against Gideon Ashby? He could offer her marriage, respectability, a home of her own, an end to service, the restoration of everything her father's death had taken from her. And I could offer her a locked drawer of letters I would never send, and the cold protection of an establishment where she was, and would remain, a servant, because a Duke of Wexmore could not marry his niece's governess, could not, must not, would make her the scandal of 3 counties and the object of every sneer in every drawing-room she entered, would ruin her more surely by loving her than Ashby had ruined her by leaving. That, you understand, is what I told myself, that my silence was for her sake, that I was protecting her. It is astonishing what cruelties a man will commit and call them protection, when the truth is only that he is afraid. So I said nothing. Worse than nothing, I withdrew. I told myself that if Ashby could restore her fortunes and I could only cost her her reputation, then the kindest thing, the only decent thing, was to stand aside and let her be won by the man who could give her a life. I ceased inventing consultations. I dined out. I was cold to her, deliberately, achingly cold, in the belief that I was setting her free, and I watched Gideon Ashby call at Wexmore House 3 times a week with flowers and easy laughter, and a claim on her past that I could not match, and I wrote her the 42nd letter and the 43rd and did not send them, and I have never been more miserable in my life, and I congratulated myself the entire time on my nobility. My grandmother let me persist in this for the better part of a month. I have wondered since why she waited so long, and I have concluded she was giving me every opportunity to save myself, and that when it became plain I would not, she decided the matter had gone on quite long enough, and took it in hand, as she took most things in hand, without asking my leave. It happened on a wet gray Thursday. I was in my study at Wexmore House, doing nothing that could not have waited, when my grandmother came in without knocking. She never knocked, and sat down in the chair across from my desk and looked at me over the rim of no teacup at all, which was worse, for it meant she had come on business. "Adrian," she said, "how long do you mean to go on being a coward?" I set down my pen. "I do not know what you mean." "You know precisely what I mean, and I have not the years left to spend on your pretending otherwise, so we shall skip the part where you insult us both." She folded her small hands. "That man Ashby means to propose to Miss Carroll. He as good as told me so this afternoon, in the mistaken belief that I would be pleased. He believes he has only to ask, and I dare say he is right, for what is she to do? She is alone in the world, she has not a penny, and he is offering her a roof and a name and an end to a life of walking other people's children across other people's lawns. She would be a fool to refuse him, and she is not a fool." My grandmother leaned forward. Unless there were some reason to hope for something better. Some reason a woman of sense might weigh against a comfortable competence, and a man who has already once shown her exactly what he is worth when the weather turns. Is there such a reason, Adrian? Is there anything at all you wish to say to her, before that easy fool asks her a question she will feel obliged to answer yes? I looked at my grandmother and I felt the whole of my carefully constructed nobility waver, and I clutched at it. "There is nothing I can offer her," I said, "that would not cost her more than it gave. If a man in my position were to, she would be ruined, scorned. She would carry it the rest of her life. I will not do that to her. I love her too well to do that to her." And I heard how it sounded, even as I said it, and I hated it, and I said it anyway. My grandmother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, very gently, which frightened me more than any sharpness, "Adrian, my dear, do you truly believe that being loved by you would ruin her? Or are you afraid that if you reach for something and were given it, you would have to stop believing that you deserve to be as cold and as punished and as alone as you have decided you deserve to be, ever since Henry died?" I could not answer her. I sat there and I could not answer her because there was no answer, because she had reached in past every defense I had and put her small, dry hand directly on the wound, and named it, the thing I had not let myself name in 3 years, that I did not stand aside for Rosalind's sake, that I stood aside for my own, that I had made a religion of my own coldness because the coldness was a penance, and that I would rather be justly wretched than unjustly happy, because a man who had failed his brother had no business being happy, and Rosalind Caro's warmth threatened to make me happy against my will, and I was terrified of it, and I had dressed my terror up in the borrowed robes of self-sacrifice and paraded it about and called it love. My grandmother rose. She came around the desk, and she said, "You have a great many things to say to that young woman, Adrian. I know it because I know you, and because a man does not go about with a key on his watch chain for 3 years and guard it the way you guard yours unless there is something locked up that matters to him more than his life." She held out her hand, palm up. "Give me the key." "Grandmother." "The key, Adrian." And I do not know to this day why I did it. Perhaps because I was exhausted. Perhaps because some part of me had been waiting 3 years for someone to be braver on my behalf than I could be for myself. But I unhooked the small key from my watch chain, and I put it in my grandmother's outstretched hand, and I watched her cross to the low drawer of my desk and unlock it and take out the bundle of 43 letters tied with plain twine, and I did not stop her, and I have thanked God for my own paralysis every day since. She weighed the bundle in her hand. She did not open it. She never read a word of it then or ever, which was a delicacy I did not expect of her and have loved her the more for. She only looked at the thickness of it, and at the Miss Caro that showed on the topmost fold in my hand, and something moved in her old face that I had not seen there since before Henry died. "A year," she said softly. "A year of them." And then, brisk again, dabbing at her eye in a way she would have denied under torture, "Well, you would not send them, so I shall. This once, since you have not the courage, I shall be your postman. And then, Adrian, the rest is yours, and I will not do it for you, because it cannot be done for you, but I will at least see to it that she knows, before that fool Ashby asks her, that there was a man under this roof who loved her enough to write her 43 letters and too much of a coward to send one. She may do with that what she likes, but she shall have the choosing of it. I will not let her marry a comfortable nothing in the belief that nothing better was ever offered, when the truth is only that the better thing was too frightened to speak." And she went out with the letters in her hand, before I could summon a single word. I sat in my study for what remained of that afternoon in a state I have no words for. I have faced ruined ships and failed banks in my brother's grave, and I have never known a suspense to equal those hours, knowing that somewhere above me, in the schoolroom or the small parlor, a bundle of my most naked and secret self was being placed in the hands of the one person I had spent a year hiding it from. I did not go up. I could not. I sat and the light failed, and no one lit the candles, and I waited to learn whether I had been undone or delivered, and could not have told you which I feared more. It was full dark when the knock came at the study door. A real knock, soft and hesitant, and not my grandmother's, for my grandmother never knocked. I said, "Come in," and my voice did not sound like my own. Rosalind came in with a single candle in her hand, and the bundle of letters in the other, the twine untied, and I saw at once that she had read them, all of them, or enough of them, for her eyes were red and her face was pale and grave in the candlelight, and she stood just inside the door as though unsure of her welcome, which I could not bear, that she should be unsure of her welcome in a room where every object had been arranged for a year around the thought of her. "Your Grace," she said, and stopped. "Miss Carroll," I rose. I did not know what to do with my hands. "Your grandmother gave me these." She lifted the letters slightly, and her hand was not quite steady. She said you would not have wished it, and that she did not care, and that I was to read them and then do exactly as I pleased and let no one, herself least of all, tell me my own mind. A breath. So I have read them, all of them, and I find I do not know what to say to a man who has written me 43 letters and never let me see his face while he did it. "You need say nothing," I said. "You were never meant to bear the weight of it. I wrote them so that I need not speak them, so that they should cost you nothing. I release you entirely from any—" "Stop," she said it quietly, but it stopped me. She came further into the room and set the candle down on my desk, so that its small light fell up onto both our faces, and she looked at me, not down, not away, but full at me, with those clear gray eyes that had never once in a year been afraid of me. "You have spent this whole year," she said, "deciding what I should be permitted to bear and what I should not. Deciding all on your own that being loved by you would be a burden to me rather than a gift. Deciding I should be spared. You have been very busy, Your Grace, sparing me things I never asked to be spared." Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. "Did it never once occur to you to ask me? In a whole year of letters, 43 of them, did it never occur to you that I might have a mind of my own on the question of my own heart?" Rosalind. It was the first time I had ever said her Christian name aloud, and it stopped us both. "You wrote," she said, and her voice broke now, and she pressed on through the breaking. "You wrote in one of them, the one about the mornings, you wrote that you had begun to be able to bear the mornings again, and that it was my doing, and that you had never told me because you did not deserve to be so healed after your brother." The tears stood in her eyes. "Adrian, do you know how many mornings I have borne alone? Do you know what it is to nurse your father to his grave and bury your family and go out into the world with nothing but your own 2 hands, and to walk into a silent house full of a grief so like your own that you recognize it at the door, and to give and give and give of what little warmth you have, to a motherless child in a frozen household, and to tell yourself sternly every night that you must expect nothing back, that a governess is not permitted to hope, that it is not your place, and then to discover in a locked drawer that you were loved the entire time, loved past speaking, by the one person you had ordered your whole heart never to hope for." She was weeping openly now, "And so, to my shame or my glory was you did not spare me anything," she said. "You made me lonely in a house where I was cherished and called it kindness. Do not do it any longer. I have not the strength for any more of your kindness." I crossed the room. I did not decide to, I simply found that I had. And I took her hands, both of them, the letters slipping from between us to the floor, 43 of them fanning out across the carpet, and neither of us so much as glanced down. And I said the things at last that I had spent a year writing and never sending. And I said them badly, out loud, stammering, nothing like the fine sentences in the letters, and they were 1,000 times truer for the badness. "I have loved you," I said, "since the morning I saw you walking Sophie across the frost, and I have been a coward, and I told myself I was noble, and my grandmother is quite right. I have been afraid not of ruining you, though I let myself believe that, but of being happy, because I did not think I had any right to it after Henry, and you have made me happy in spite of myself for a year, every single day, and I have punished us both for it, and I am done. I am done, Rosalind. I do not care what 3 counties say. Let them say it. I would rather be the scandal of England with you than the most respectable cold man in it without you. I have no talent for saying this. You see how badly I say it, but I love you, and I have loved you a year, and if you can forgive a man who was too much a coward to send a single letter, I should like to spend the rest of my life saying to your face what I only ever dared write to your name." She was quiet for a moment, a terrible, hopeful moment, and then she gave a small, wet, shaking laugh, the first easing of that grave face, and she said, "You dreadful man! You have made me cry all over your grandmother's best handkerchief, which she pressed upon me on the stairs, having plainly foreseen the whole of this. She is a witch, Adrian, you know she is a witch." And then softer, all the laughter gone tender. "Yes, of course, yes, I loved you before I ever read a word of these. I only never let myself say it, even to myself, because I thought it was not my place. We have both of us been so busy deciding it was not our place. Let us stop. Let us decide instead that it is. I have left one person out of this account too long, and I will not leave her out of its ending, because she settled the whole business the following morning with a single word, and it belongs to her. We told Sophie first. Before the settlements, before the lawyers, before Ashby, before a soul in London society, we told a 6-year-old girl in the schoolroom, because she had more right to know than any of them. Rosalind knelt down to her, in the same gray gown, in the same schoolroom where I had stood so many evenings in the dark outside the door, and I stood beside them both in the light for once, and Rosalind said, "Sophie, your uncle and I have something to tell you. Your uncle has asked me to marry him, and I have said yes, which means, if it would please you, that I should be your aunt and should live with you always, and never go away to any other schoolroom ever again, but only if it would please you. It must please you, or it does not happen at all." Sophie considered this with Henry's own grave frown, the frown that undid me every time I saw it. And then she looked up at me and she said, "Then you will both be here in the mornings." And I understood with a completeness that I have never lost exactly what my absence had cost this child and this woman both, and exactly what I was being given the chance to mend. "Yes," I said, and my voice was not steady. "Both of us, every morning." "Then yes," said Sophie, as though it were the simplest arithmetic in the world, which I have come to believe it is. And she put one hand in Rosalind's and one in mine, and the frozen house, which had been 3 years thawing, was at last entirely warm. Gideon Ashby called the next afternoon, as it happened, with his flowers and his easy smile, not yet knowing. My grandmother received him. I do not know precisely what passed between them, for I was not in the room, but I know Augusta, and I have no doubt she was perfectly gracious and perfectly lethal. He did not stay long. On his way out he asked, with what I will grant was real feeling, to speak a moment with Miss Carroll, and Rosalind, who would not have him spared any more than she would be spared herself, met him in the hall with me at a distance, and I saw him take her hand and say something low and earnest, and I saw her answer him gently, and I saw the exact moment the truth of it reached him, for his easy face fell into a genuine and unfamiliar seriousness, perhaps for the first time in his charmed life. And then I will say this for Gideon Ashby. He did the one wholly creditable thing I ever knew him to do. He bowed to her very low, and he bowed to me across the hall without rancor, a man acknowledging that the better claim had been made and made good, and he took his hat and went, and did not come again. She told me afterward what she had said to him. "I told him," she said, "that I did not doubt he had come back meaning kindly, but that I had learned the difference between a man who is kind when it is easy and a man who is kind when it is hard, and that I had found in this house the second kind and meant to keep him." She smiled at me, that grave, sweet smile. He could not argue with it. It was only the truth. We married quietly at Elmsworth in the small stone church where Henry lay, because Rosalind said she would not begin our life pretending the grief had never been, and that Henry's daughter should stand up with us, which she did, in a new frock and a very solemn state, holding the ring. There was talk, of course. My grandmother had been quite right that there would be talk, and quite wrong that it signified anything at all. A duke married his niece's governess, and for a season the drawing-rooms of London had their scandal, and then they found another, as they always do, and meanwhile my wife walked into every room with such quiet, unassailable dignity, and made herself so plainly, warmly at home in a world that had meant to reject her. That within a 12-month, the same women who had sniffed at the match were confiding their troubles to her over tea and begging her advice on their children. She had a genius for being loved that had nothing to do with beauty or fortune, and everything to do with the simple, radical fact that she was interested in people, really interested, warmly and truly. And it turns out the world cannot long hold out against that. I have watched it fail too. The letters, the 43 of them, she keeps still, tied again with the same plain twine in a drawer of her own now, and once a year, on the anniversary of the frost morning when I first saw her on the lawn, she takes them out and reads one aloud to me by the fire, and makes me listen to the man I was, so guarded, so certain he had no right to what he wanted, so busy calling his fear a kindness. She says it is good for me to hear it. She says a man who has once mistaken cowardice for nobility should be reminded of it now and then, lest he grow proud. She is generally laughing when she says this, and I am generally holding her hand, and Sophie, grown now, and grave and clever and merry all at once, so exactly her father's daughter that it no longer breaks my heart but only fills it. Sophie rolls her eyes at the pair of us from across the room, the way the young do at the sentiment of the old. I wrote her 43 letters in a year and sent not one of them, and I very nearly let the whole of my life slip past on the strength of a grief I had turned into a locked door. And it was not my courage that saved me in the end. I had none, but 2 women braver than I was. An old one who put my own heart into the post against my will, and a young one who refused, at last, to let me spare her from being loved. I have thought a great deal in the years since about the man I might have been if my grandmother had knocked that Thursday and waited for my leave and taken my no. He would have let Rosalind marry her comfortable nothing. He would have gone on cold and correct and justly wretched to the end of his days, honoring his brother by making a tomb of his own life and calling it duty. I do not like to think of him. He is very close to me, that man. He is only one unsent letter away. But my grandmother did not knock, and Rosalind did not let me spare her, and so I am here instead in the warm house in the morning with my wife and my brother's daughter, and the frost long melted off the lawn. I remain as ever your servant. I signed it 43 times to a woman who never saw it, and I sign it still, every day now, out loud and to her face, and it is no longer a lie and no longer a secret, and it is, as it always was, the truest thing I know.